So we'll move over here and let's start with the single sport prescription. And there's an excellent article in the journal that we just recently released.
Who did?
Who? I think I did. Theoretical template for CrossFit endurance programming. It's going to cover a lot of what I'm going to talk about here. Make sure you go and reference it because it covers basics, and the goal here is to take those basics and expand on them. So we start with the single sport prescription. This is where we're taking the theory of using CrossFit endurance and putting it into practice. So we have a week. What's the basic single sport prescription for CrossFit? Ideally, 4 to 6 times per week. And then what is the prescription for CFE? 2 to 3 times per week, 2 intervals, and 1 stamina. Nuno and I were talking about this the other day. When you're training for an event, it's very, very easy for a CrossFit athlete to say, you know what? I'll do the interval work, but I'm not going to do the stamina. That goes right back to what we talked about with that constant variance piece on both sides. You're doing just the interval work and you're only hitting those anaerobic systems and you know you suck at the longer stuff, you're completely ignoring what you need, which is that stamina work. And stamina work, for our intents and purposes, comes in the form of a time trial, which as we know is 100% effort, or a tempo. Now, when we typically see traditional tempos in the endurance community, they're usually at a very reduced percentage or effort level than what would be considered maximal intensity. For us, anywhere from 85 to 95% of a PR or effort level, rate of perceived exertion. So how do we spread that out during the week? So we'll start, we'll keep it basic. We'll program our CrossFit. So right now we have CrossFit 4 times a week. And let's just say this particular athlete is not necessarily competing in an endurance event. They're not training for a marathon, but they're trying to improve their capacity, say, at the CrossFit Games. Or they just want to improve their metabolic conditioning using CrossFit endurance. Then we'd add in a 5th day of CrossFit, because that's the focus. CrossFit makes you fit. CrossFit endurance is that sport-specific supplement that makes you that much better. So now we go and look at the schedule and say, all right, they're doing 3 on, 1 off, 2 on, 1 off. Where do we add in the CrossFit endurance? Well, number 1, time trial or tempos, stamina work, needs to be on a CrossFit rest day. Why? Because the goal of that day is for you to go out and throw down. To go out and test your capacity, see what you're capable of. The nice thing about our program is the fact that we can constantly test time trials every single week. We're seeing if the athlete is getting better. It's not, we're going to go out and have you do long, slow distance and then hope you can perform at pace. Because as we talked about, if a runner says they want to finish a marathon or do a triathlon, or they want to actually place in a triathlon, those needs of those 2 different athletes, completely different. Big, big, big spectrum there. Finishing, you can have them go out and do stamina. But if they want to place, you definitely need to use the stamina in a form that's actually going to give you some sort of measurable, observable, repeatable data. That's what the stamina does. And you're going to alternate this between a time trial and a tempo. So maybe week 1, time trial, get a baseline, know where they're coming from, know where they start. The following week, do a tempo of that, and you can kind of continue to follow that cycle. And again, you can go back here, slowly build up the volume with intensity. And we can make it basic. We can add in another interval workout here, and add in an interval workout on Saturday. And the one last component, and while it's the last component we're talking about for the single sport prescription, you should circle it, highlight it, put glitter on it, do whatever you need to do to make sure you actually write this down and keep a note of it. And that is strength and conditioning recovery. One of the greatest quotes ever is from Tess, one of our assistant coaches. And she said when people talk to her, she doesn't tell them that she's a strength and conditioning coach. She doesn't tell them that she's an endurance coach. She says, I'm a recovery coach. Now, I've never heard someone refer to it that way. And I honestly think it's one of the best quotes I've ever heard. Why? Because she's highlighting the fact that this needs to be super, super important, which is why strength and conditioning recovery should always be done after a really long interval set, after a time trial or tempo, or after a race day. One of our head coaches, Carl Borg, after he finished his 100-miler, his girlfriend said, all right, let's get you home. He said, no, take me to the gym. He went to the gym, he did his glute ham sit-ups, he did his glute ham back extensions, he did his kettlebell swings, his pull-ups, and his bench press. Not for time, 5 to 15 repetitions, relatively light to medium weight, walked out of the gym, open hips, feeling a whole lot better. So why do I bring that up? Because no matter what kind of athlete you are, swimmer, single sport athlete, triathlete, military athlete, you name it, CrossFit Games competitor. Progression and recovery. Why? Recovery is why you get better, not more training. We should all know this. We know we don't improve in the gym. What we do in the gym is, sure, yeah, it's going to help us improve our training. We're going to get better. But we're not actually going to see the results of that until we go out of the gym, eat well, sleep well, and actually take care of ourselves. That's where we actually see the results of our work. That's where we're actually seeing return on investment. So why is this important from a programming standpoint? Oftentimes we get emails. In fact, I think we had a couple yesterday or a couple days before. And they always ask, can you write me a 16-week calendar? RunnersWorld.com has their automatic coaching tool. You go on, you put in your time you want, you put in how many miles a week you want to do, you kind of guess what your level of ability is, whether it's beginner, intermediate, or advanced, or elite, and then it plugs out this perfect 16-week calendar for you. Kind of gives you some basic days of when you should do the running, how many miles you should do, but what doesn't it take into account? It doesn't talk about technique. Certainly really doesn't hit intensity, at least in our definition of intensity, where we're actually concerned about power output, since the traditional endurance athlete is far different when they think about intensity. All it has is volume, 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 volume. What are we concerned with? Weekly energy expenditure. You have to, when you program, be concerned with weekly energy needs. So whenever we get someone who says, hey coach, will you write me a 16-week program? No. Why not? Because our needs are based on weekly energy. You cannot take an athlete, whether it's a CrossFit athlete or an endurance athlete, throw them into a full CrossFit endurance prescription right off the bat and expect them to do well. You have to go back to progression and recovery. Maybe in week 1, you start with just one interval. And then in week 2, you add in a stamina work. And then maybe week 3, you actually add in that other interval. You have to build them up. Doing 2-a-days, if you're not conditioned to handle it, takes time. Why? Because the requisite intensity we want needs to be there for both workouts. Imagine doing Fran in the morning, then turning around and throwing down and doing 50 meters in the pool, 50-meter sprints in the pool, or 800s on the track, just as an example. Sounds like a great time to noon it. But imagine if you totally crushed Fran in the morning, and then we said you have to come in the afternoon and do this with intensity. The average person who's not conditioned to handle it, yeah, they may go out and do it, probably going to get overtrained, probably going to get themselves hurt. We have to respect progression and recovery.